The Electoral College, an introspective study by Ellie Derringer. First, let's look at what is the Electoral College? How does it work? And lastly, and somewhat most importantly, how democratic is it really? In order to answer these questions, we must go back to when the Electoral College was first considered, at the Constitutional Convention. The first idea proposed was that each congressman would vote for whom they wanted to be president individually. The second idea posed was that each state legislator would vote, and the state legislators would decide as a whole whom they wanted as a state body. The third idea was that each citizen would vote individually for their preferred candidates. The Founding Fathers determined that all three methods really wouldn't work. But why? They believed that these methods would lead to corruption, they would divide Congress, they would upset the balance of power, and that simply there were too many people to count each and every individual vote, even though they wanted a democratic system. What soon emerged became known as the electoral system, which was designed to have the most knowledgeable and informed delegates to express public opinion. The first design of this system had the number of electors set to the number of senators each state had, which was 2 for all, plus the number of members of the House of Representatives each state had, which varied. These electors could not be congressmen or federal employees. It was up to the states to appoint who would be their electors. These electors would meet in their states and cast 2 votes, one being for an out-of-state candidate. The candidate with the most electoral votes would become president, and the candidate with the second most electoral votes would then become the vice president. However, this system did not lend well to the two-party system that soon emerged in American politics, and it became a very large issue in the election of 1800. And so, a second design was needed. This design was the same as the first, but with the addition of the 12th Amendment, there were separate votes for the Vice President and President of the United States. This was much better for a two-party system, like is used today. Speaking of today, the Electoral College today. What does it look like, and how does it function? Well, the number of electors is the same. It's 2 senators, plus the number of representatives each state has. And there are 2 more electors for D.C., which was brought to them through the 23rd Amendment to the Constitution. Again, no congressmen or federal employees could be electors, and the electors were now going to be chosen by political parties. So let's talk about the actual voting system. On the Tuesday after the first Monday of November, every eligible and registered citizen in the United States will cast their ballot for whom they want to be elected into office. Hopefully. But voter turnout is a different issue. Still serious, but different. The popular vote of each state then means that winner takes all, as far as electoral votes goes. This means that whichever candidate receives the most popular votes in one state will also receive every single electoral vote that state has, which is equivalent to the number of members they have in Congress. Every state follows this system, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, who cast their electoral votes in proportion to the popular vote. This means that the electors of each party that are sent are proportional to what the people express they want in the percentages of the popular vote. On the Monday after the second Wednesday of December, the electors are sent to D.C. and cast their ballots. The running mates who win the majority votes become the Vice President and the President of the United States. So let's talk about some pros and cons of the electoral system. Some of the pros are that there's a better distribution of popular support, that's more even. There's also an increased value of minority votes, a reinforced political stability, and it supports federal systems, with more state representation. Some of the cons or downsides to this system is that it often stifles minority opinions, or could lead to the possibility of a minority president, if the country's divided too much. This kind of raises some questions, considering the pros mentioned earlier, but we'll get there in a moment. There's also the risk of faithless electors who don't vote along party lines, and this system often reduces voter turnout, because there's less political efficacy, for it doesn't always reflect popular vote, which causes people to think that their vote doesn't matter. This has been seen in 2000 and 2016 most recently, and both are hot topics with lots of controversy. Going back to the topic of minority votes, there is an increased value of them. However, they can also be stifled depending on how the two-party system is functioning year by year. And the possibility of a minority president is really not good for the country, even though it might go against the two-party system and let more voices be heard. This could be an issue because if it is a minority president that only emerges due to the fact that the country is so divided, it's not a true majority of what the people believe. It's simply a third option due to the other two parties being in such a great feud. As a quick reference point, there are 538 electoral votes in all, and a presidential candidate must reach 270 electoral votes in order to win. Let's talk about democracy. A democracy is a system of government by the whole population, which means that the governmental leaders and actions should reflect the public perspective, opinion, and preferences. However, in the 2000 and 2016 presidential elections, the candidates who won didn't win through popular vote. They only won through the winner-takes-all method of the Electoral College. So does this mean that voices weren't heard, especially considering the popular vote voted for the other candidate? And therefore, is this system not democratic? So what about proportional vote, as is used in Maine and Nebraska? Proportional vote has the electoral votes cast to be proportional to the popular vote, and therefore more accurate to what the people want, which inherently is more democratic in nature, if you look back at the definition. If proportional voting methods were used in all of the U.S. states, then third-party candidates would actually have a chance of winning, and those who supported them would have a more valued vote. There'd also be no disparity between the popular and electoral vote. This system isn't perfect, though. There are still faithless electors who impact both methods of the Electoral College. These faithless electors do not vote along party lines, or for whom they'd said they'd pledged to vote for originally, and therefore really aren't representing the people or reflecting their preferences. There's no way for the people to know for sure who these electors are going to vote for, unless if they take them by their word, which has not always proven to be true or accurate. Knowing the presented facts, is the current Electoral College system democratic? It's really up to the American constituents to determine this, and to determine if action needs to be taken in order to reform the system. However, it is this humble government student's opinion that the American Electoral College system is not as democratic as it could be, and that reforms need to be made in order for the people's voices to be heard, especially in light of recent political events and the misrepresentation of the American populace's opinions.